Good morning. As you sit here, you hear the waters running. And my first inclination is go to try to turn it off. But this water really refers to like the recycling of life and how life continues on. And I don't know how many of you noticed some of the names that are here on the wall, that there's names that most of us who are my age would remember, like Edie Gourmet, Dinah Shore are just a couple of the names here. And on Edie's memorial plaque, it says, we'll be together at the end of time. I guarantee it. You can bet on it. And Edie is right next to her son, who died. And the idea here is that this is a sacred place, and the remains of people who are special to us are here. And for Rick and for Alan, their parents are going to be here for eternity. But they'll be in your hearts really forever, and not just in the sacred ground that means so much to so many people. We say, Esainai el haharim me'ayin yavo Ezri, Ezri me'i madanayo se shemayim va'aretz. We lift our eyes into the hills. Where does help come when life is really difficult? And hopefully it comes from our faith in God, and whether we call God by a certain name or we call her by another name, it doesn't matter. But what we have to realize is that we're part of the cycle of life. And the wonderful part is that we all have a part to play, and we're all a little bit different with different capabilities. I live in an area called Arcadia, and we have a recreational place there called Santa Anita. And some of the stars of Santa Anita are this tall, and we are just a couple miles from the Forum where people like Shaq used to play, who were that tall. And Shaq loved riding horses, but he could never find the ones that were strong enough to tolerate his weight for a long time. And so even though he would love to have been a jockey, no trainer would use him. And also Johnny Longden, who was one of those little guys in my temple, happens to be on a street called Longden, named after Longden. He could never play on a professional basketball team, but he enjoyed basketball. And the same thing with life, and the same thing with our Judaism. Some of us live it in many different ways, and some of us do it in different ways, and some of us are ritually rigid, and some of us are ritually more liberated. When we have questions in life, we pick up a tablet and do a Google or a Yahoo search or a WebMD search, depending on how old you are. But the tablets that Moses gave us, you couldn't ask any question. There were 2 tablets, each had 5 commandments on it, but they didn't answer our questions. And one of the questions was, Esainai el harim me'ayin yavo Ezri, Ezri me'i madanayo se shemayim va'aretz. We lift our eyes into the hills. Where does help come from? And the answer was, Ezri me'i madanayo se shemayim va'aretz. It comes from that source, that power that's made both the heaven and the earth. And it's our hope that that source and that power will be with all of you in one form or another, and it won't be uniform. And again, we're all wired a little bit differently. But the most important thing is that we look for a spiritual side to our lives. So today is a day of many thoughts, and it's a doubly difficult day. Losing a parent is difficult. Losing both parents on the same, or having the service for them both on the same day is doubly difficult. But it's something that all of you are here for, and you're here for Rick and you're here for Alan and for Tina and the rest of the family. So I hope that all of you will share some of the wonderful memories of both of them, of Adrienne and Marty. So we're going to call first upon Sandy Monroe, Adrienne's brother, to share some thoughts with us.
Okay. Adrienne was my sister and Marty my brother-in-law. Adrienne was 5 years older than me, and Marty was a big brother that I'd always wanted. I'd like to share my memories of Adrienne, and as I used to call her, and probably the only one, 80, and Marty, and how their lives have affected me. I'm going to read this, and I may have a hard time going through it, so please bear with me. Although my sister didn't graduate from high school, she was well-read, and it was obvious that she was very smart. When I couldn't remember if I liked a certain food, I'd ask her, 80, do I like that? She would remember even if I couldn't. She hated to be called 80, but it was my nickname for her anyway. When I was in elementary school in Westchester, I always looked up to my sister. When she and her friends went to the movies, I wanted to go with them, but they wouldn't let me. My parents finally said, please take him. So they did, but they wouldn't let me sit in their row and found a seat for me several rows from them. They got married very young. She was 17 and Marty was only 20. Even though I was sad that she moved from our house, I was happy that I got her bedroom, which is bigger than mine, and more importantly, because she married Marty. My sister and Marty were the first people I knew who had a color TV. They didn't live far from us, and we went to their apartment several times to watch Disney's Wonderful World of Color. When they moved to Northridge, they lived far from us, and we didn't see them often. I was always so happy when my parents took me to visit them. They had a swimming pool and a pool table. I always had fun at their house, and Marty always told us a lot of good jokes. As an adult, I appreciated them even more. As I've said, Adrienne was smart, and I enjoyed talking to her. She was now nicer to me than ever before, and had the same political views as my wife Pam and I. The one vice my sister had that bothered me the most was how much she smoked. She finally was able to stop smoking after she went to a hypnotist and never smoked again. I was so proud of her. After Pam and I moved to San Diego in 1979, we didn't get to see them as often. I missed them so much. When Pam threw a 40th birthday party for me, I had the best time with my friends and family. Both Marty and my father-in-law, Aaron, were the best joke tellers. Every time one told a joke that had us all laughing, the other tried to tell one better, and the party went late into the night. Then in 1990 and 1991, the economy in San Diego was bad, and I couldn't find a position as an attorney in San Diego that would pay a reasonable salary. So I had to move to Los Angeles without Pam and our children because I found a firm that paid a good salary. I went back to San Diego on the weekends and went back permanently after 2 years. While I was in Los Angeles, my sister and Marty had me come for dinner once or twice a week. Each week, I look forward to my visit with them. Years later, my son Brian moved to Los Angeles and has been with Disney around 20 years. My daughter Amy moved to Los Angeles for a few years. Every time Pam and I visited our children, we made time to visit Adrienne and Marty. Marty always had jokes for us, and we loved it. Visiting them over the last 3 or 4 years has been the hardest for us. We began to see Marty having trouble remembering his jokes, and both of them struggling at times to remember words. When I got the call from Alan that my sister fell and fractured her leg, and that both she and Marty had to go to the hospital, I was devastated. Then they both moved to rehab, where she began to really feel better after a lot of physical therapy. Marty, not so well. He got a bladder infection and had to go back to the Ventura Hospital. Alan found a really good assisted living home in Tarzana near he and Trina, but my sister had to go there without her beloved Marty. Because of COVID, I couldn't see them, and I've been saddened ever since. Then I received a call from Alan that my sister passed away from COVID, and the next day, a call that Marty passed away from COVID, leaving a large void in my life. That I won't be able to see either of them again. They will be missed, but they will be in our hearts forever. Please, everyone, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming here today to honor the memory of my parents, Marty and Adrienne. Recently, Trina and I were going through a box of pictures and things that my mother had kept, and I found this card. This was written from my father to my mother. It says, "We've been together 20 years, and had our fun and shed our tears. Life has brought us 2 boys who gave us worries, also joys. We married very young, and our love blossomed and grew. But honey, when I look back, the years really flew. Now comes the day when we can say all this was worth the effort. 20 years of hopes and fears, love and trust have conquered the feeling I have inside for you. Can only be described by saying you are my life. I'll love you forever, Marty." That was after 20 years. They were married 63 years. Last week, while Trina and I were walking around this very peaceful and serene resting place, I was looking at some of the headstones in this area, and it occurred to me that each was just like a book. The birth date that's on the headstone represents the front cover of that book, the beginning of the story, the first chapter. And the date that they passed represents the end of that story, the final chapter. But then I noticed that in between the start and finish date, there was a little hyphen. And it's that space in between the dates, that little empty space that represented the total expanse of the life that that particular individual had lived. And that little empty space has a whole lot to say. For my father, his first chapter began in 1937 in New York. His was a typical childhood of the 30s and 40s. He went to school, he played stickball in the streets with his friends, and he was the big brother to his younger brother Bob and younger sister Phyllis. His family came to California around 1950. My mother began her life in Illinois in 1939, and her family moved here when she was just a toddler. My parents met each other at a party in February of 1957. She was just 17 years old, and he was a senior in high school. He was out of high school. He was just 20 and fresh out of the Army. As my mom told the story to me, and once again very recently, my dad was at that party with his friend Ellis, and my mom said she was way more interested in Ellis than she was in my dad. but my dad had eyes only for her. And so he asked her out, and they went out on many dates over the next 6 months. One of the places they always liked to go was to Dolores's Drive-In. Another thing that he told me about during their dating was one evening they were cruising Hollywood Boulevard, and he went around a corner without stopping, and a cop pulled him over and gave him a ticket. Not 1 hour later, he went around that same corner, didn't stop that same stop, and he got another ticket by another cop. After spending the 6 months dating, they got married in September of that same year, and that marriage would last 63 years. My mom spent her entire married life doting on my dad. She was the stereotypical 60s and 70s housewife. She happily did all the household tasks while he was out being the breadwinner in his family's plumbing business. They both shared raising my brother and me, and I recall that one of the things he really loved about her was her cooking. At the end of every meal, he would remark that that was the best meal he had ever eaten, and this made her very happy. And in return, my dad spoiled her as much as that he could with the finer things in life. There were the years that they dabbled in owning racehorses. There were trips to Europe, ocean cruises with their friends, and there were many, many trips to Las Vegas. And there was always a new Cadillac in the garage. Oh, there was also jewelry. I remember one piece that he bought her that was a necklace that came with a pendant. Hanging from that was just a number, and the number signified where he felt she ranked in his mind on a 1 to 10 scale, and that number was 10.5. But their lives were filled with a lot more than just material things. They loved their family and their friends with all their hearts. They took a lot of joy just being with those that they loved at the many dinner parties, backyard barbecues, and family celebrations that they put on over the years. In fact, their closest friends from the early days were still their friends at the end. There was Roberta and Marvin Snyder, and after Marvin, Neil Newman. There was Marty and Adrienne Stone, Judy and Bernie Pike, Yona and Bert Schwartz, and after Bert, Greg Ryan. There were brothers, Sandy, who you heard earlier, and Bob, who has since passed, and a sister Phyllis, who's here today, and their spouses and children, and many cousins, Eileen and Bonnie, Sue and David, Sharon and Bruce, along with their spouses and children, and of course my brother Rick and myself, and my children Brian and Stacy. Growing up in their home for me was a place of love, nurturing, and support. Oh, and a lot of jokes. My dad worked hard 6 days a week to provide us with the things that he never had growing up. As a child, we experienced many trips to places like the beach, the zoo, Travel Town, Kittyland, pony rides, Marineland, and POP. When I turned 16, they bought me a car, and they sent me to France for a whole summer the year I turned 20. For my 21st birthday, I recall with fondness the trip where they took us all up to Lake Tahoe. Mom and Dad were always there to help us kids out with school projects and happily took us to Saturday afternoon matinees or the roller skating rink. They sent me to UCLA, but after 2 years there, I wanted to quit and start my own business. They supported that idea, even though, as they would tell me many years later, they really didn't expect it to work. But I am still at that business 41 years later. Thanks to them, they were generous beyond measure, and this generosity extended to anyone and everyone that was ever in need. So when out of the blue, when their time of need came after my mom fell and broke her leg, you can bet I didn't hesitate for a second to jump all the way in to help in any way that they needed. With the help of my wife Trina, of course, I couldn't have done any of this without her love and support. But in spite of all of us and what we did, their doctors and nurses, the terrible scourge of our times that we are all dealing with, ended up taking them away from us all too soon. They got to spend 63 years together on this earth, and I take solace in the fact that they are together now in heaven, continuing the love story that began so many years ago and will be continuing on for all eternity. So, Mom and Dad, may you both rest in peace, and you were both 10 and a halves in my book. Thank you.
Not very good at public speaking, barely good at private speaking. Here we go. The stories you're about to hear are true, only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. When I was very young, like 3 or 4 or 2, the story goes that our family was by a pool. It could have been at the old Standard Club in LA, I'm not really sure. But at some point in the day, not being the genius I am now, I just walked straight into the pool and sank to the bottom. My parents were watching, and my dad jumped in immediately and rescued me. Lucky for me, my parents didn't know how much money that move would eventually cost them, or that day might have turned out a lot differently. My dad saved my life that day and made my life on all the rest. The earliest memory I have of my parents is the day of the Kennedy assassination. I was 3 and a half, and it's barely a memory, but I do remember the little black and white TV with the people in the car and the sadness in the room, which was never there before. Another early memory I have of my dad is of a wedding we were at. I don't remember how old I was at the time, or whose wedding it was, but we were in a room with the groomsmen waiting for the ceremony to begin. The TV was black and white, so it was a long time ago. Anyway, golf was on. Most of the men in the room were watching. I don't know if it was Jack Nicklaus or Arnold Palmer, the US Open or the Masters, or just some random tournament. What I can tell you is my dad was there and how happy I felt to be one of the guys. It's the little things in life that matter most, isn't it? In 1971 at summer camp, when I missed the boat and fell into the water at Busch Gardens, who was there to bring me dry clothes? My mom. In 1970, when I crashed a mini bike into the neighbor's wall, who cleaned and bandaged my scrapes and cuts? My mom. Who made me go with the neighbor to get new bricks and fix the wall? My dad. In 1973, when I split my pants in a bowling tournament at Granada Lanes, who rushed me a new pair before the next game? My mom. When I was teased mercilessly in school for being fat, who made me feel better when I got home? My mom. In summer camp, when I fainted walking from Griffith Park to Traveltown, despite having a full canteen, who was there when I came to? Okay, well, that was my brother. Who took me to auditions at 20th Century Fox so I could become a child star? My mom. Who took me to lunch at the Apple Pen when I didn't get the part? My mom. The fondest memory I have of my mom is that she used to read to me. We'd snuggle up on the couch and she'd read to me from The Wizard of Oz, Gulliver's Travels, Treasure Island. It didn't matter that I was 27 at the time. One day when I was about 12, it was pouring down rain, and I mean pouring. My mom picked us up at school, and when we got home, there was a dog standing there in front of our house in the middle of the street in the midst of this downpour. It was a big dog, one you'd normally approach with caution or not at all. My mom stopped the car, got out, and coaxed the dog to her. It turned out the dog was old and blind and lost and scared. It had tags, so we were able to contact its family, and they were reunited shortly after. If my mom had not yet punched her ticket to heaven, she did so on that day. When I was about 13 or 14, My brother's lifelong friend and mine, Rick Hecht, lost both his parents too, very close together. After his mom passed, I remember my mom hugged him and held him and gave him what comfort that she could. When I was in elementary school, I was allergic to just about everything except Alana Weaver. I was taken out of school 3 times a week for allergy shots. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, my mom would pick me up at school, drive me to the doctor's office, I'd get the shot, and we'd go back to school. I hated the shots and the doctor's office, but I loved the drive there and back with my mom. Eventually, I grew all my allergies except for the ones in school and work. We watched movies together, too, at home, my mom and I. We saw The Outsider with Tony Curtis, her favorite actor, about the life of Ira Hayes. We watched Bogart and Key Largo, Sinatra and None But the Brave. We watched Cagney and Hepburn, Lancaster and Coburn and Brando. Seeing James Cagney always reminded me of my mom's father, Lenny, who passed away when I was very young. We went to the drive-ins in those early days, my mom and dad, with my brother and I in the back, usually in our PJs. We saw Spartacus and Our Man Flint. We saw The Flim Flam Man and Fitz Willie and Who's Minding the Mint, and Bonnie and Clyde and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Probably my mom and dad's 2 favorite movies. I remember walking around the house for days after saying, "I am Spartacus." Like many moms, ours was the linchpin of our family. She was the hub that connected all the spokes. Marty and Alan and Sandy and Zelda and Sid and Celine and Hushy and Eileen and Bonnie and Marion and Sue and Bruce and David and me. I recognized this early on and was glad to have told her so. Humor was the constant in our family. We told jokes, we drank, we smoked, we gambled, and above all, we laughed, at home and at family gatherings. I remember the throaty roar of my Grandma Zelda, the wheezy, boozy laugh of dear old Uncle Sid, the baritone of Hal Karofsky, the light giggle of Cousin Debbie, the masculine chuckle of Neil Newman, and the frequent infectious laughs of my Uncle Sandy and Aunt Pam. At home, we listened to comedy albums. Alan Sherman, Bill Cosby, George Carlin. We watched Laugh-In and Mary Tyler Moore and All in the Family. We loved Flip Wilson, Artie Wilson, Sammy Davis Jr., Ted Knight. There was Sock It To Me and Here Comes the Judge, The Farkle Family, Dingbat and Meathead. There was Bill Cosby's brother Russell and the 7 words you can't say on television. We respected Rodney Dangerfield. My mom and dad would want us all to laugh today, not cry. Well, my dad would want you to cry first and then laugh. Besides family and friends, my dad loved football. He loved all sports, but football far above any others. We went to Rams games and Raider games, went to Dodger games and Laker games. Truth be told, it was my dad who invented the touchdown dance. It wasn't Ickey Woods or Joe Horn or Terrell Owens. It was my dad in our living room in Northridge whenever the team he bet on scored a touchdown. In the 70s, my dad brought home fun stuff like mini bikes and pinball machines and pool tables, and the latest innovations, the Betamax, the Nehru jacket. He had beautiful, thoughtful jewelry made for my mom. There were after-dinner walks around Beverlywood, usually just my dad and I. Later on in Northridge, we walked with our little dog, Brandy. On Thursday nights during football season, we'd walk down to the Karofsky's house to get the weekly football betting cards. My dad and I played handball together on Sunday mornings in Nobel Junior High, then headed over to Brent's Deli to bring Sunday brunch home for the family. There was a father and son bowling league, games of horse, and around the world in the driveway with my dad and my brother. There were board games and billiards and pool parties. My dad attended every game of my abbreviated basketball career. Growing up, my parents were hardly the strictest, but they were adamant about one thing: no war toys. I didn't like it at the time, but I'm grateful for it now. I strongly recommend it for any of you planning to start a family. I don't recall my brother ever getting grounded. I'm sure he did, but I remember mine. There was the great liquor cabinet raid of 1974. And sneaking out my dad's car when I was 14 and 15 and driving my friends around the neighborhood. There was one time when I was driving the car down Yolanda Street and passed my mom coming back the other way. I wish you could have seen the look on her face. There were curfew violations, and the time I snuck out and saw The Exorcist with my friend Claudio and his parents. I slept with the light on in my room for 30 days after that. In the late 60s, when sports weren't on TV around the clock, 365 days a year, CBS began airing the NBA Game of the Week, 10 a.m. every Sunday morning. My mom would make breakfast while my dad and I watched Earl the Pearl Monroe drop 40 on the Celtics and 50 on the Lakers in living color. In 1972, I remember us being at Grandma Zelda's apartment. We watched Cannonero II loop the field to win the Kentucky Derby. I haven't missed a Derby since. Over the years, my dad had regular poker games with various groups of friends. Once in a while, he'd sit in on a game with me and my friends at our house in Encino with his Bombay gin and all of his jokes. And I was so happy then that he was one of the guys. My dad was a provider. He worked 6 days a week for the better part of his life. He left early in the morning and came home late in the evening. He brought home with him the scent of an honest and hard day's work. And it's just something that has stuck with me for life. It's the little things. Work was a big part of my dad's life, and so many wonderful people came in and out of our lives via Luskin Plumbing that I know he would like me to mention now. There was Gino and Annette, Eddie, Guido, Ida and Millie, Eugene and Barry, Smiley and Smokey, Ron Eschel, the late Michael McNeil, and Mr. Wink, to name just a few. The original Luskin Plumbing shop was on Robertson Boulevard, a few blocks from our apartment on Bedford. I used to walk over there on Saturdays, hang out with my dad and Grandpa Louie, and my grandpa's beautiful, wonderful German Shepherd Gino, who'd be laying in the sun in the yard in the back. Later on, there was Bud the Wonder Dog, who wandered into the newer shop on Venice Boulevard one day and stayed for life. I remember how my dad loved that little dachshund. My parents were happy when they had nothing, eating mac and cheese several times a week, and they were happy when they had money. My parents were generous to us, to family, friends, and employees. My dad always had a handout for a stranger in need, providing that change of 100. Growing up, my parents sent us to summer camp at Camp Cost a Lot, and then to the orthodontist, Dr. Cost a Lot. I'm continuing that tradition now with my dog Emma and her veterinarian. You guessed it, Dr. Cost a Lot. On some summer days when I wasn't at camp, my dad took me to work with him. I remember every single one of those special days. Almost done. Besides family and friends and football, my dad loved food. The story goes, when my dad lived at home, dinner there was like the gunfight at the OK Corral. My dad, my Uncle Bob, and Grandpa Louie all came to the dinner table with forks drawn. And when that food hit the table, it was every man for himself, stab and grab, plate and devour. You got it fast, or you didn't get it. When they were dating, after his dinners at home, my dad would usually go over to my mom's house for a second dinner. We had our own weeknight dinner at home and bagels and lox on Sunday. Thanksgiving at the Karofsky's house when we were young, and later on at my brother's. There were many favorite restaurants, too many to name. The Flying Saucer, Roberto's, Love's and Cupid's, Brent's and Jerry's and Froman's. There was $3.95 all-you-can-eat fried clams on Friday nights at Howard Johnson's on Reseda. There were Dodger dogs and sausage sandwiches at Little Pietro's by the Coliseum before Rams games. On the weekends at our houses in Northridge and Encino, my dad would grill up a wicked good breakfast in the morning and steaks and burgers at night. a tradition my brother has carried on for a long time now. My mom and dad both came from humble beginnings, and they accomplished a lot in their lives, in business, in family, and in charity. I remembered the two goals that my dad mentioned most often. One was to make his first million. And this was back in the 70s when $1 million was worth 100 times more than it is today. Eventually he got there, and then some. The other wish he had was to live to be 100. He talked about it a lot. While neither parent didn't make that milestone chronologically, in laughter and happiness, kindness and generosity, both my parents hit the over. My mom wanted only for my brother and I to be healthy and happy, and for Democrats to be in the White House. I wish I could tell her now we won the Senate too. I see my dad in the mirror every morning, not just in the hairline, but in the carriage and the posture and the smile. I see it in my brother as well. My dad used to say, anytime a Gentile puts mayonnaise on a corned beef sandwich, somewhere a Jew dies. I have a mind after this day to track down those mustard-defying SOBs and tell them just exactly how truly wonderful my mom and dad were. There's no remembering the lives of my mom and dad without remembering those closest to them, both living and after living. All the Luskins, the Monroes, the Karofskis, the Fettermans, the Palmers, the Snyders and Newmans, the Gildens, the Goldbergs, the Revels and Revel Matlaughs, the Schwartzes, the Stones, the Pikes, the Panzers, the Stassies, Howard Goodman, Ron Eschel, Rick Hecht, my friends, my brother's friends, my darling Marina, and our little dog Emma, and Brandy and Sparky and Blazer, all of you and them sewn indelibly into the fabric of our lives. You can't summarize life so glorious in 1,000 words or 10,000 words. But if you were to ask me today to describe my mom and dad in just one word, that word would be unforgettable. Thank you.
Love you, bro.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the 3 tributes. Does anybody want to share a remembrance at this point?
Either here or on Zoom.
Yeah, if you're within the Zoom area of a mic. It's not easy for Rick and for Alan, but we thank you, and for Sandy as well. Let me share with you while we try to gather all those names. Maybe this is what Adrienne and Marty would say to all of you. Don't grieve for us now, for now we're free. We're following the path that was laid for us. We couldn't stay another day to laugh, to love, to work or play. Tasks left undone will stay that way. We've found peace at the close of our day. But if our parting has left a void, then fill it with remembered joy. A friendship shared, a hug, a laugh, a kiss. These are the things you know we will miss. Be burdened not with times of sorrow. I wish for my family the sunshine loving of tomorrow. And when you must come this way alone, you know we'll both greet you with open arms, a smile, and a welcome home. Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the memory of the righteous is as a blessing. Okay. Now we're going to put the, place the caskets now, or later. You'll do it later? Okay. I want to have you put these Kriya ribbons on. It's a Jewish custom that we tear your outer garment when a blood relative dies. But as liberal Jews, we know it's not good to tear good clothing, so what we do is we tear the ribbon. And the symbolism that this symbolizes the fabric of your life, and you have to reweave it with the wonderfully strong threads of which some of them you talked about today, and that you can do this in the days ahead. Oh, great. Okay. Stephen, we need one more for Anthony. Sister. Very nice. My dad's sister. Very nice. Okay. Good. I'd like to ask the rest of you to please rise as well. El Malei Rachamim Shochem Bamromim Hamtzei Minucha Nechona Takat Chemtei HaShechina Lishma Shalchim La'olamo Bal Rachamim Yitzor B'tzor Chaim Et Nishmato Anochonato Vainua B'Shalom V'Namaro Meim. O God is full of compassion, dwells on high, grant perfect rest unto Adrienne and Marty who have departed from this world. Lord of mercy, bring them into your presence. Let their souls be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be thou their possession. May the repose always be one of peace. Amen. Amen. There are more booklets over there if you need them.
You could speak a little louder. It's difficult to hear. I know it's here through your mask.
Right. Okay. There are more booklets over here if you need them. Yeah. If you could give us the remainder that's in there rather than taking one per person. Oh, here. Great. If anybody else needs one. So this concluding prayer is called the Mourner's Kaddish. And if you're not up on your Aramaic, this prayer says that life is a gift given to our temporary keeping. And although we are at the final resting place of two people who were deeply loved and two people who loved their lives, we're commanded to realize that thank you. We are commanded to realize that we have a gift of life. And if you listen closely beyond the sound of the flowing waters, you can hear the sound of a freeway. And that tells us we need to go and do, and for some of us to schlep. And so we need to do that, and life continues on. The greatest tribute to both of them is not by curling up in a ball and withdrawing from life, but by exuding joy, the joy of life, the zest of life, the joy of life that they shared with all of you. So this prayer says, although we are here today for a sad occasion, we are grateful for their lives and for the lives that issued forth and the lives that continue to be a force. So this is found on page 31 and 32. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah v'yamad divra kurute v'yamlik machute v'chayachon v'yamachon v'chayed kol beit Yisrael Bagalavis man karivim rameim. Yehe shemei rabba mevarach le'alam u'mayeh maya yisbarach yishtabach v'yitba'ar roman v'yitnaseh v'sadar v'salel shemei kodesh abrichu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata jush bahata v'namata damiran v'yamavim rameim. Yehe shlama rabba min shemai v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'im rameim Osei Shalom Bimramav, Hu Yaseh Shalom. Olenu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Your beloved have entered the peace of life eternal. Though vanished from bodily sight, they don't cease to be. They abide in the shadow of the Most High with God, but live on in your hearts because you love them. May the beauty, the warmth, the strength, the high ideals are cherished. Imbue you with a sense of duty, a sense of purpose, a sense of joy. And may the smiles that they created for you during their decades of living continue to inspire you in the days ahead. Amen. Stephen, do you have